So now begins my trip to San Antonio. Unlike previous times, we decided to fly because a 15-hour trip to Texas is not how I want to start any vacation. Our first stop on this trip was Bussey's Flea Market. We wanted to go shopping, but we really didn't feel like being cramped against other people in a shopping mall, so we decided this flea market would be the best solution. This flea market had endless stalls with all sorts of different goods. You can pretty much find anything that you would be looking for, or maybe a couple things you weren't looking for at this flea market. The vendors here also have a great variety of used items, but also new items that would be great for either fashion or decorating your interior or exterior of your home. Bussey's also had a great variety of handmade items, as well as items that you would find inside of the store. Many vendors were selling religious paraphernalia, but then there were other vendors that were also selling items such as antiques and even plants. This stall was one of my favorites. It had a wide variety of antiques and historical items that gave you a nice view into the past. Since we flew in, I was trying not to buy all of these items, but there was so much temptation, especially that old telephone. This next shop had an endless variety of swords, and I frankly love swords, but for some reason I've never owned one, and all of these swords were just calling my name. But the problem is I packed my suitcase so full it would be nearly impossible for me to even fit the smallest one of these into my luggage. This club hanging from the ceiling was also calling my name. From Bussey's, we decided that we would go to the Hard Rock Cafe for lunch. It was comforting to see they were temperature checking and isolating all the guests. After our meal, we decided to take a walk down the Riverwalk. The Riverwalk is usually packed with people, but thankfully there weren't very many people out. Next, we walked by a bridge that was made famous by the movie Selena. There is also a star with Selena's name outside of the Hard Rock Cafe. After visiting the flea market and walking the Riverwalk in the 100-degree weather, we decided that this would be the end of this day. The next day, we decided to kayak with the Guadalupe Canoe Library. We rented kayaks from the Guadalupe Canoe Library, and then they drove us to Nichols Landing, which was the beginning of this little trip. During the several hours that we were on the river, we didn't see any other kayakers, so it was really nice and peaceful out. We were also able to see the wildlife as we paddled down the river. Here we see a cow that was just on the edge of the river that we somehow mistook for a bear initially. The rest of the herd was grazing nearby off the banks of the river. This was my first experience with the water sports, and this time we actually got a canoe. But if I had to do it again, I would definitely get a kayak. It's easier to maneuver than having to coordinate with a partner. I also wore flip-flops into the river, and moving forward, definitely get water shoes, because at one point I lost both of my flip-flops to the river. There were also numerous turtles that were sunning on top of logs that were protruding from the river. We learned quickly that the turtles were very people shy and would quickly swim away if we ever got close. Kayaking is definitely an experience that everybody should have, but don't be like us. We forgot to put on our life jackets at the beginning of the trip. While most of the water that we traveled over was pretty shallow and shallow enough for us to stand in, there are portions of the river which you could dive deeply to the bottom. This is when we first encountered a wild duck on the river. Surprisingly, this duck was really friendly and followed us for a good portion of the trip. I really enjoyed our friendly visitor and ended up naming him Albert. While I'm sure he was just looking for food, I'm just going to keep telling myself that I obviously look so friendly that wild animals will approach me. Albert appeared towards the end of the trip. He was an adorable conclusion to our journey down the Guadalupe. Our next stop was at Topgolf. If you know me, I've never been a fan of golf, but I was so excited to try this experience. Never would I have imagined that you can hit golf clubs from your dinner table. So this is my first time really golfing, so make sure you do not laugh at me. Look and see how beautiful a swing can be when you've actually had golf lessons. And here's the very first antelope I've ever seen in my life. And please check out this massive steer. Yes, he is real. And this concluded my trip to San Antonio. It was so beautiful, and Texas is so very different than Alabama. I'm so happy that I got to experience this.